Howdy. All right, today we're going to talk about an unpleasant subject. That's not that unpleasant, but we're going to talk about monopoly, so let's hope we don't encounter too many of them in our lives, or I guess since the fun never ends unless you let it, the way to have fun with this is to imagine that we own one. Although as you'll discover, depending on how you acquire it, it might not be all that big of a deal. If you buy a monopoly from somebody else, for reasons that we'll discuss, you're not likely to do any better than in a competitive environment. Because the bidding process for the firm that has no competitors and no close substitutes, which is what we mean by a monopoly, the process of bidding for that firm to purchase it from the original owner is likely to impose a cost on you that kind of makes up for the fact that you'll be able to charge a lot more for the product than it costs to actually produce it. To actually manufacture it. All right, so let's kind of get right into it and kind of contrast what we've been doing so far. We just talked about competition. So the key term there was price taker. The firm was not in any position, I'm saluting now, because the firm is not in any position to decide what it is they're going to charge. I mean, sure, they can decide to charge whatever they want, but if they charge more than the going rate, no sales. Or minimal sales depending on geography. And if they charge less than the going rate, they're probably going to lose money because the going rate is what everybody else is having to charge just to barely get by. Okay, so whatever the going rate is in a competitive environment, you're going to be a price taker. To survive, to barely make enough money to cover expenses, because you see that's what happens in a competitive environment. Firms enter until the price falls to the level of the most efficient producer's average cost. Boy, it's a jungle out there, right? Maybe that's where that phrase came from. It's going to be tough. You're going to have to be good just to have a normal profit, which you should understand that lingo means by now, enough to cover all opportunity costs. All right, so now we're going to talk about a monopoly, which is somebody, no substitutes for their product, close substitutes, and no competitors. Single seller, what the word monopoly means in a different language, Latin. And so the monopoly is in a position to be a price maker. Now, price maker doesn't mean charge whatever you want. Anybody can charge whatever they want and always have to bear the consequences. Okay, but the monopoly is in a position to look at the demand line, the demand schedule. Well, here, let me show one in a minute. I'm going to clamp this to my little easel here in a minute. This is what we mean. The P and Q column of this is the demand schedule. Okay, the price that pertains to any given quantity. The monopoly is in a position to choose which price from that list of choices depicted by the demand schedule, which if drawn is called a demand line, if graphed. They're in the position to choose which one of those prices and therefore quantities makes them the most money. For example, let's look again at this little made-up demand schedule. If they charge $8, they'll sell 3 of them. 3 times 8 is 24, so that'll be how much money they make. And if they charge 9, they would only be able to sell 2 of them. Okay, so but that would have made them $18. So they make $6 more revenue if they charge $8 for it rather than $9. Well, then the issue comes up to whether the additional unit going from 2 to 3 added more or less than $6 to their costs. If less than $6, well then charge $8 rather than $9. Maybe charge $7. Again, I'll clamp that up there in a minute and make some additional points, but decided to make it right there. So we're talking about what a monopoly means. Monopoly power means the ability to sustainably make an above normal profit. In other words, to not see market entry cut into your monopoly. So in other words, to have barriers to entry of some kind to keep firms from entering it, to try to get in on those above normal profits, right? I mean, by definition, if profits are above normal, most folks are making lower profits. Okay, and some of them are going to be able to do whatever it is the monopoly is doing. And I don't have too many skills and ability that are unique to one person. And they're going to think, I'm not making as much, I could do this. Well, if they can successfully get into the market, well, then it's not a monopoly anymore. And the person that had a monopoly won't have it anymore, and they won't be making as much money as before, and so they don't have any monopoly power. So monopoly power means some ability to sustain their price-making ability to keep out close substitutes and direct competitors. And in some cases, that means the firm has got to spend some of its earnings from being a monopoly on these barriers to entry. Somehow, some way, monopoly power means the presence of durable entry barriers, something that will keep others out. And as I said, that may require effort to either create and or sustain. It may not have taken much effort to create because maybe you invented something and now you've got to keep other people from copying you. And if it's a substantial invention, you can go get it patented, and for a period of years, the government will protect your monopoly power, and then your patent will expire and other people can copy you. And that's what we've decided is the just reward for having a really cool invention, is the ability to charge monopoly prices for a period of years. You might think, wow, that's kind of a trade-off. The person that invents something is rewarded by getting to rip off people for a while. In other words, charge a lot more for it than it actually costs to roll one off the assembly line. True, because as soon as the patent ends, the price will drop to just what it costs to roll it off the assembly line. This is happening to drugs all the time. The generic copy of it comes out the day after the patent has expired. It's been produced. It's just waiting for that day to arrive. And that means, but up till that point, the person with the patent has got lawyers ready to sue anybody that tries to sell what they invented. And anyway, it's strange in a way that we haven't yet figured out other ways to reward somebody for inventing something other than to be able to charge way more than the production cost for a long time. Since I jumped onto item number 4 on the sources of monopoly power, ahead of doing number 1, 2, and 3, I might just add that it's not that nobody has thought of it, it just hasn't been implemented yet. Maybe it's not as good of an idea to have prizes, for example, just kind of a standing prize that we somehow calibrate to the scope of what somebody invents. And that way they get a big reward for possibly investing gazillions of dollars in inventing something, or maybe just tinkering in their garage and getting lucky. And anyway, they get a big prize, and then the product goes onto the market right away at a much lower price that that's a lot closer to what it costs to actually produce it. I mean, any new product is probably going to cost a little bit more at first than later after people have gotten experience producing it. But in any event, we get past that umpteen years that while the patent is going, that a monopoly price is the legal price, and no one can weasel in on it and compete. And another way for it is, okay, have patents, but then have somebody, the taxpayer, whatever, go out there and buy up the patent. You know, go out there and make an offer and say, look, we'll buy that patent for you, and then tear it up, gone, and then so it's not patented anymore. Anybody can make it and sell it for whatever they can get for it in a competitive market. Now, that has some problems, including the cost to whoever buys up the patent is going to be the expected current value of all future differences between the patent monopoly price and what it actually costs to roll it off the assembly line. So all it does is shift to the present, and depending on who pays it, it's going to be the same cost difference as if the patent just runs its course and they make the higher prices for a while. But in any event, depending on who comes up with the money to buy the patent, it could shift income from somebody that has more to somebody that has less. And you know, when that can be done without a huge loss in the amount of transfer, that's probably a good idea. All right, so I named number 4 in the list of things that are sources of monopoly power, that being invention. What are the other 3? Well, government action can do that. A patent is sort of a government action, but I'm talking about other kinds of government action, namely limits on entry that exist for a lot of things, up to the point of just allowing one producer of something. This happens a lot in corrupt countries. It's one of the ways in which crony capitalism arises in much of the world. If some dictator or maybe an elected president, but somebody in charge gives one of their buddies a exclusive franchise, the exclusive right to sell a product. They've got a monopoly, and now you've got the Army and the Navy and the cops and whatever to enforce that and to keep competitors from being able to legally sell the product. Economies of scale is another one. It's number 2 on the list, but let me get into that one a little bit more because I've got it up here on the graph. Before I do that, let me just mention the third one, which is kind of obvious. If it takes a particular input to make something, and you've cornered the market on it, in other words, you own all the sources of that input, you've got a pretty effective barrier to entry. I think that's on the duh category. Now, then the issue there is to make sure, let's just say it's diamonds. Okay, and you've got a product made from diamonds, and you've purchased all the diamond mines in the world, or for some reason you owned them to begin with. To keep buying diamonds when it would be really, really valuable to have a source of diamonds to compete with the product that you have that's made from diamonds is going to be pretty tough. But anyway, it would work if somebody could pull it off economically, is to have exclusive access to an input. Okay, so back to number 2. Economies of scale, okay, which is just a fancy term, but it's a useful fancy term to understand and to have heard, because it's used a lot, means that your long-run average cost, forget the long run for a moment, the average cost of making something, a term you're now familiar with, gets lower and lower for a long time. By a long time, I don't mean time-wise, but I mean if you just keep increasing production, you have to increase it a long time, to reach the point at which the cost per unit bottoms out. And just for the sake of a number, I've supposed that occurs here at a quantity 1,000. Well, suppose you couldn't even give away 1,000 of these. In other words, the demand as such would look like, let me see if I want to clutter up my graph. Well, let's go ahead and do that. Let's suppose that the market demand for this product, let me see make sure I hit that 1,000. Oops, I grabbed the marker again. It has no ink. The live marker, the one in my pocket. Okay, supposed to be a straight line that ends here at 1,000. Suppose you couldn't even give away 1,000 of these, right? Price is 0, the quantity demanded would be 1,000. In fact, the way that I drew this, there's only one quantity at which you can charge enough to cover the average cost and thus break even. Okay, so if the scale of production to minimize cost is close to or even more than the amount that the market could absorb even at a low price, much less free, you've got a situation that many people and all economists would call a natural monopoly. It's natural because the first firm that gets big can sell the product at a lower price than anybody else can without losing money. Okay, and so that doesn't mean the firm will use that price, will sell it that cheap, way down here, but they could whenever necessary to keep out competitors. You see, so this low cost at a high output can be used as a barrier to entry, cutthroat pricing, if you will. So if somebody tries to get in, say at this price, the firm says, well, I'm just going to expand if you do that, and I'll be able to sell it cheaper than you can, put you out of business. So that can be a barrier to entry. Okay, so sources of monopoly power, government action, including crony capitalism, government action such as a patent to recognize and reward technical innovation, exclusive access to some critical input to make a product, and economies of scale. Those would be the big 4. And let me I've got this little picture up here, and you're saying you may not even be able to see it. So let me go back to that so I can get you back in sync if you're still not in there in terms of price taking versus price making. So what does price taking mean? That salute thing, okay? Maybe you got that from the performance, the salute, and the going rate and all that. What does this mean in terms of the models we've been using? Well, there's a market for X. That's an X for a product, a good. Okay, big Q for the market. And all producers of X. This says one producer of X. I'm almost sure you can't read that. One producer of X. Okay, the marginal revenue for the firm will be constant, equal to the equilibrium price. Little q for a piece of big Q. Okay, so that's price taking. Marginal revenue is constant, equal to the market price. With a monopoly, marginal revenue is not constant. I'll get back to my numbers that I flashed. Here it is. Get back up to these numbers in a minute to illustrate that. Marginal revenue isn't constant. It's not dictated by a competitive market equilibrium. Okay? The marginal revenue is less than price, and as my example will illustrate, it falls twice as fast as price. So if you saw a graph like this, with or without the L or ATC, just from the demand line, you would be able to tell, since the marginal revenue falls twice as fast as price, that at half of this quantity, where the demand line hits the x-axis, is where the marginal revenue line would hit it. And the marginal revenue goes down in negative, so if you didn't want to, if you wanted to, you could draw it into the negative territory, right, below zero. Okay, so typically we don't need to do that, but you'll see from my example. Let me go ahead and post that up here, and yeah, I'll just do it over this. Hopefully the graph behind it won't distract you too much. Let me get my little clips, put it up here. And again, some of you may be wondering, if I haven't mentioned this in one of my other videos, why I'm doing this versus some PowerPoint or some high-tech presentation. I've looked at some PowerPoint presentations, especially my own, on video. I've had some lectures recorded. Man, oh man, is that a snooze. So I'm hoping this is a little more lively. My assistant Blanca here, right? I mean, I've got lettering all over poor Blanca now, but Blanca, you know, Spanish for white, for those of you like me that are mostly monolingual English. And so together, hopefully, we're a little bit more lively than a small figure dashing back and forth in front of a blackboard or whiteboard, or standing as a little tiny figure with a big old PowerPoint presentation. Okay, so we'll do that. I use PowerPoint in class. I have it there as my outline, and then I get to be more animated in class to kind of keep you from falling asleep, although I'll keep working at getting better at being more lively. Serious academics with a sense of humor. All right, so here's just a numerical example to illustrate why the marginal revenue will fall twice as fast as the price. You know, I'm pointing at this, and here's a D, so price. The demand line results from graphing Q and P, right? This is the demand schedule. Graphing it graphs into this downward sloping line, the law of demand in action. Okay, you've seen that a bunch already. Okay, if we multiply price times quantity for each of the choices that the monopolist has, right? One choice is to charge 10, and only one will sell, or to charge 9, then 2 will sell, or to charge 8, and then 3 will sell. So these are the choices for the price maker. Okay, and here's the result in terms of money in the cash register. 1 times 10 will yield $10. Selling 2 at $9 each will yield $18. Selling 3 at $8 each will yield $24. And here's the change in the revenue, the marginal revenue, that results. Okay, so we can decide whether lowering the price a little bit further is a good idea or a bad idea. We, just as the same with the competitive, all firms will compare their marginal revenue to their marginal cost at each possible output level, and then pick the output level where marginal revenue just barely covers marginal cost and say that's where I should stop. So the monopolist is going to do the same thing. So for example, if MC was constant at 5, they would make 3 of these, right? Because the fourth one, to sell 4, they'd have to lower their price to 7, and that 4 times 7 yields only $4 more than selling 3 of them for $8 each. Okay, so you can see here that price is bigger than marginal revenue after the first unit, right? 9's bigger than 8, 8's bigger than 6. And you can see that whatever rate of decline in the price, demand, price line, graphing the price against the quantity, right? The price over here, quantity over there. And that the marginal revenue will fall twice as fast as the price. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 10, 8. See, these fall by 2. And you're saying, well, Doc, is that unique to this 10, 9, 8? No. Try this at home. Make this go 10, 9.5, 9, 8.5, 8. Okay, so you're going down by half each time. Okay? Then this will go 10, 9, 8, 7, right? Instead of, well, this will go down 50 cents each time. This will go down at $1 each time. As long as the schedule graphs into a straight line, for simplicity, all of ours will, the marginal revenue will fall twice as fast as the price. So once again, that means one of the trick questions on the test is to expect you to do things with the MR line without providing it. But those of you who have paid attention said, that's easy. I don't need to have the MR provided to me. I can draw it on there. It's easy. Wherever the demand line hits at half that quantity is where the MR line hits, and it always starts at the same place. Right? It always starts at the quantity 1 with the same number. Right? Quantity 1, the price, and MR are always the same, right? Because the change in revenue for the first one is always equal to whatever you charge, the $10 in that case. Okay, so we've nailed down that marginal revenue is equal to price for a competitive firm, as you remember from previous chapter. And now we've nailed down why, if we have price-making ability, the ability to choose from this menu of choices, that the marginal revenue will be less than price, except for the first quantity, and goes down twice as fast as price. So if we stick the MC on there, now we can decide what the profit maximizing price is. And then if we put the AC on there on top of that, then we can find out how much profit they make when they maximize profit. Okay, so let's do that. That'll be down here if I can get these two pieces of paper to separate. At some point it'll be hard to get them to stay because the glue will be gone. All right, so that's what we've got here. Here we've got the case that would probably exist in a fully informed decision-making world of future certainty. Here we have the case, the bottom graph, of a second-hand monopoly. Somebody buys the monopoly from the original owner. Maybe the original owner had a patent, and the patent maybe somehow is forever, or it's going to go for a while, or they've got some other durable barrier to entry. And so their ability to charge a price way above marginal cost is going to survive. Everybody that's going to buy the monopoly or has a chance to buy it, to bid on it, knows that the bidding process will eliminate economic profit. Only normal profit will result from the acquisition cost of the original monopoly. Okay, so I'm getting ahead of things because you may still be wondering, well, where does this come from? All right, this would be the price down here equal to marginal cost if we had this competitive price-taking situation. But you see with the monopoly, it's higher because the monopoly says, hey, here's where my marginal revenue, additional money coming in, equals the additional money that's going to go out to keep producing more. That's my optimum quantity, and I'm not going to stick a star there because while it may be the monopolists at the monopolies maximizing, profit maximizing quantity, optimum for them, it's not optimum from society's perspective. So we'll just call it Q prime. We'll call the price that sells that much P prime, okay, apostrophe P prime. So we find the quantity where additional revenue equals additional cost. Okay, that's the last one worth making. Okay, all initial units yield more revenue than cost. This one, let's say it's 25. The 25th one just barely covers the additional cost of making it. Okay, so that's why the 25th one is where we stop. The 26th one, if this is 25, additional cost is more than the additional revenue that it yields. Okay, so up to 25, additional revenue is more than additional cost. Okay, so at this quantity then, we use the demand line, the menu of choices, to say, okay, this many I can sell at this price, and I should. Having a shortage would be a drag, right? Okay, if they sell it for more, they won't be able to sell that many. If they sell it cheaper than that, they'll be able to sell more than that. And if they only make that many, there's a shortage. That's a drag. Okay, so at that price, they're maximizing profit. If this is the average cost, because it's a second-hand monopoly, price equals average cost, which you know means normal profit, zero economic profit. Now, if it's the original monopoly, the average cost, if the marginal cost is constant, is equal to that. And then okay, so with AC 0, I'm going to sketch in, I'm going to shade in what would be the economic profit. Okay, price minus average cost times quantity is the profit when it's competitive, and it's still the profit. It's just in a way of writing total revenue minus total cost, right? Price minus average cost tells you the average net per unit times quantity is the total difference between your expenses and your income, your revenue. Okay, so Q times P minus ATC is the same thing as total revenue minus total cost. On a graph like this, that's equal to this shaded area. The monopoly, and the reason I said this is going to be about an unpleasant subject, it's not so unpleasant talking about it, it's unpleasant if you have one. The reason is because this will yield underproduction from society's perspective. Beyond this point, let's call it point A. That's an A written from somebody looking down on it sideways. Point A. From point A onward, quantity-wise, the additional benefit, the willingness to pay for it, is more than the opportunity cost of putting out another one. Okay, so by stopping at Q prime, which the monopoly sees as preferred, we incur what's called a deadweight loss. Some of the gains from trade, maximum gains from trade that would be realized where marginal cost equals marginal benefit, will be lost. Okay, so I'll just shade that in. Okay, this shaded area is the deadweight loss that results from foregoing the gains from trade that would realize by society by increasing production from Q prime to Q star. And you may not be able to see that. That's a Q star. Hopefully my Q prime is big enough that I didn't pre-draw the Q star and I didn't leave myself much room. Q star maximizes society's gains from trade from producing product X that could be competitive or could be monopoly unless there are economies of scale. Here we're assuming there are none. So the monopoly's choice for profit maximization yields a much lower quantity than would result from competition, and so there's a deadweight loss equal to the area of this triangle, which we can leave for another time since I didn't put any numbers on this graph. Now the last thing we want to talk about is, suppose we have a natural monopoly. So here we are back up to this graph. How would we possibly want to regulate it? We have to allow them at least a normal profit to keep them in business, right? If we set the price below the price that yields a normal profit, they'll shut their doors and go find something else to do with their resources. So to keep the thing from shutting down, we have to allow at least a price equal to average cost. Okay, so if we had this demand in this situation, yeah, that would be right there, easy. Now, price equals average cost is not typically the most efficient thing because sometimes the marginal cost is below the average cost. We know the most efficient quantity is where marginal benefit or price equals marginal cost. So the two choices that we have as regulators to achieve efficiency or come close without putting the firm out of business is to have one of two plans. Okay, regulate the price so that it's equal to the firm's average cost, which can be challenging because the average cost is not constant. It depends on quantity. And it shifts depending on changes in the cost of inputs and depending on changes in technology. Or the other alternative is set the price equal to marginal cost, but in case the marginal cost is below average cost, allow the firm to charge an access fee in order to make up for the difference between the revenues with price equal marginal cost and price equals average cost. To avoid losing money, to avoid the firm saying, I quit, if we set the price equal to marginal cost, which again is a moving target, then we need to, if marginal cost is less than average cost, we need to allow an access fee. And you've seen access fees before. They're just fixed costs that you get on your bill for something that don't vary depending on how much you consume. That's just basically an access fee. Or for some of these clubs that you can join, you have to pay a membership fee for the right to buy things at lower prices than you see them elsewhere. That's an access fee. And the typical firm that does that makes more of their money on the access fee than they do selling the goods because there isn't much margin left on selling the goods. All right, that wraps up this discussion of monopoly. Monopoly is in a position to look at the demand line, the demand schedule. Well, here, let me show one in a minute. I'm going to clamp this to my little easel here in a minute. This is what we mean. The P and Q column of this is the demand schedule. Okay, the price that pertains to any given quantity. The monopoly is in a position to choose which price from that list of choices depicted by the demand schedule, which if drawn is called a demand line, if graphed. They're in the position to choose which one of those prices and therefore quantities makes them the most money. For example, let's look again at this little made-up demand schedule. All right, maybe that's where that phrase came from. It's going to be tough. You're going to have to be good just to have a normal profit, which you should understand that lingo means by now, enough to cover all opportunity costs. All right, so now we're going to talk about a monopoly, which is somebody, no substitutes for their product, close substitutes, and no competitors. Single seller, what the word monopoly means in a different language, Latin. And so the monopoly is in a position to be a price maker. Now, price maker doesn't mean charge whatever you want. Anybody can charge whatever they want and always have to bear the consequences. Okay, but the monopoly substitutes, which is we mean by a monopoly, the process of bidding for that firm to purchase it from the original owner is likely to impose a cost on you that kind of makes up for the fact that you'll be able to charge a lot more for the product than it costs to actually produce it, to actually manufacture it. All right, so let's kind of get right into it and kind of contrast what we've been doing so far. We just talked about competition. So the key term there was price taker. The firm was not in any position, I'm saluting now, because the firm is not in any position to decide what it is they're going to charge. I mean, sure, they can decide to charge whatever they want, but if they charge more than the going rate, no sales, or minimal sales depending on geography. And if they charge less than the going rate, they're probably going to lose money because the going rate is what everybody else is having to charge just to barely get by. Okay, so whatever the going rate is in a competitive environment, you're going to be a price taker. To survive, to barely make enough money to cover expenses, because you see that's what happens in a competitive environment. Firms enter until the price falls to the level of the most efficient producer's average cost. Boy, it's a jungle out there. Howdy. All right, today we're going to talk about an unpleasant subject. That's not that unpleasant, but we're going to talk about monopoly, so let's hope we don't encounter too many of them in our lives, or I guess since the fun never ends unless you let it, the way to have fun with this is to imagine that we own one. Although as you'll discover, depending on how you acquire it, it might not be all that big of a deal. If you buy a monopoly from somebody else, for reasons that we'll discuss, you're not likely to do any better than in a competitive environment. Because the bidding process for the firm that has no competitors and no